What up, Cavs Nation? I'm your host, Ethan Sands, and I'm back with another episode of the Wine and Gold Talk podcast. And joining me on today's episode is Jimmy Watkins, none other than the columnist of cleveland.com, covering everything that your heart could desire on the website. Today, we want to talk about things in the NBA specifically and how they are broken. When we're talking about the new CBA rules that went into effect recently and how they are affecting the end of a season awards. And Jimmy, I know this isn't a topic that we wanted to get into until the end of the season, obviously with Chris on the podcast as well, but we came across some information recently that kind of struck our interest, and I don't think we can have conversations without giving our fans and the listeners and the knowers of ball around the league this information up front. There are stipulations in the CBA that make being able to garner an end-of-season award, especially the larger ones when we talk about MVP, Most Improved, Defensive Player of the Year, there's different things that have to go into place. And the biggest thing is that these players not only have to play in 65 games, 85% of the season, but they also have to play a minimum of 20 minutes of action in each of these 65 games. So that puts Ty Jerome a little bit in a difficult situation because if my math is correct, he's played in just 34 games this season where he has played in 20 or more minutes in those games. And I just want to read the CBA itself for our listeners so they don't think I'm just making this up. A player shall be considered to have played in a regular season game if he played at least 20 minutes of such game. So that goes into the 85% of the season and the 65-game rule that we all know. And the players have to have played in at least 65 regular season games, or the player had to have played in at least 62 regular season games and suffered a season-ending injury. So it's crazy to think about how these different rules can deter a player from being in a running based on something that is out of his control in most situations, especially when we talk about Sixth Man of the Year and Most Improved, which is minutes, and how he's used in these conversations and in these rosters. Jimmy, what do you think about this? And when you heard of this, what came to mind?
So I understand what the NBA is trying to do here, right? The reason the 65-game rule exists is because they want to incentivize players to play as many regular season games as possible because we have a DNP rest crisis, because the regular season has never meant less, honestly, than it does right now, because ratings are down, because people try to draw correlations between the ratings being down and the regular season. Not only do players not play, they don't always play super hard during the regular season. It's a big, stinky mess. And the NBA is so smart in combating this issue, in fact, that they built in a failsafe where they saw ahead of time teams trying to do so, like the Jared Allen thing that the Cavs are doing right now, right? Jared Allen wants to play 82 games. So Kenny is sometimes saying, okay, Jared, get out there, but get out there to satisfy your season-long goal. But for our purposes, the Cavs, we want you to be healthy for the playoffs, so we're going to sit you in the second half of some games, right? So the NBA sees things like that coming down the road, and they say, well, we don't want people to game the system when it comes to awards voting. So we'll slap this 20-minute per game rule on it, where you didn't play in a game unless you played 20 minutes. And the other thing is, a lot of this stuff takes care of itself, particularly when we're talking about MVP, Defensive Player of the Year, All NBA. How many dudes? Ask yourself, how many dudes are going to end up on those ballots that have a bunch of games in their game log with fewer than 20 minutes played in those games? How many? Did you come to the conclusion of zero? Because I think the answer is zero. And I'm maybe maybe the NBA maybe there were some sinister teams that they were worried about trying to, like, we're thinking of like teams like the Clippers, who are eternally resting Kawhi. We're thinking about the Sixers, Joel Embiid, who, when he's on the court, always deserves all these kinds of awards, but how often is he on the court? And maybe Philly, the whole, all these smaller complications, these award complications are falling from the tree of the season is too long, but the NBA doesn't want to shrink it because there's too much money. It's an inventory sport. Part of their sell to media partners is look at all this run time, air time we can give you. So nobody wants to take the risk of contracting the season and having a smaller package to sell to these media partners for fear, because the risk is, well, our inventory sport, we lose inventory, we lose money. You might also gain interest, but I guess we'll never know. This problem is going to exist for a very long time. This is why DMP rest exists. This is why we created these rules. This is why we have these weird backdoor minutes restrictions in them. In the particular case of Ty Jerome, I wrote a Ty Jerome case for Most Improved Player column 2 weeks ago. I didn't know that for Most Improved Player, a pretty nebulous award that again, I think awards voters can do their own homework on how much you actually weigh what a 20-minute or 18-minute per game guy, what kind of impact he's having or improvement he's having, as opposed to your Cade Cunninghams and Dyson Daniels, who are on the upper echelons. Both Cade Cunningham a star, Dyson Daniels a starter for the Hawks. I feel like you can draw your own conclusions, but I actually think this year would have been a super interesting conversation to have around that award, because as we have already talked about on the podcast, Ty Jerome is a cookie cutter, at least by the old definition of the word, most improved player type candidate, because he came from nothing and he is one of the best bench players in the league, regardless of how many minutes he plays. Okay? He just is. And the other really irritating thing about this is that Ty Jerome has, like you said, 34 games played with 20 minutes per game, right? He also has let's call it 17 as the cutoff. That's still not 65, but he also has another 15 of at least 17 minutes played. And if you go to 65 games, he's played at least 10 minutes in all these games. And how many of those lower minute totals for Ty Jerome do you think, this is just a vibe check, and I'm legitimately asking you, Ethan, how many of those low minute totals do you think are Kenny Atkinson says, Ty's not helping us out there tonight, or not as much as someone else, versus, man, we're smacking these dudes. We're beating the crap out of these dudes. So Ty, you've had a great 16, 17 minute stretch to this point. Go grab some pine. How many do you think? I think it's at worst 50-50. That's what I would say.
Yeah, especially when you talk about the beginning of the season, Jimmy, like when they were waxing teams, it wasn't like, oh, Ty Jerome, you've had a bad game, go get some bench. It was more like, oh, we literally are going to play everybody off the bottom of the bench, including some of our two-way guys, to get some run. Even Ty Jerome, you don't need to be out there because we don't need to risk you getting injured, right? And that's something that we're going to look at, especially when we come to the last 3 games of the regular season and how the Cavs are going to mitigate between rest and rust and all these things. We talked a lot about that on the last podcast. But when it comes to Ty Jerome, and obviously I don't know if the 34 is absolutely correct. I was just going through his game log on the ESPN app and like doing some counting. So if I missed a couple, my bad. But it's not close to 65. And I wanted to read this again from the CBA, from Section 6 of the CBA. Award eligibility. No player shall be eligible for NBA Most Valuable Player, NBA Defensive Player of the Year, NBA Most Improved, All-NBA Team First, Second, or Third, or NBA All-Defensive Team First or Second honors for a season unless the player has satisfied at least one of the following criteria, the award eligibility criteria, in respect of season. The player played in at least 65 regular season games, or the player played in at least 62 regular season games, suffered a season injury, like I said. But the one award that is not listed on here for everybody that's not a rookie is Sixth Man of the Year. So that's why the push for Ty Jerome this entire season has been so heavy on six man of the year because he is eligible for that, right? Because it does not
But
matter.
can I just say, as we're reading that, hearing you read, you've been reading, by the way, eloquently this entire podcast. You've done a great job as broadcaster. But the more legalese I have to read to figure out your awards voting system, the less I think of your awards voting system. Like, let the voters decide if there's a minutes issue, let that factor in naturally. Some players just make really significant impacts in lower minute. Like, I'm thinking of your prime Jonathan Isaacs, your Isaac Okuros. Isaac Okoro will tell. I'm trying to remember which day we were talking to him, but sometime recently in the last week, Isaac Okoro, I think might have been you asking him, Ethan, about all defensive team and that sort of thing. And that's an award that he holds very near and dear as kind of the Cavs' primary stopper. When that's what he's put in the game to do, is make other very good players' life hell. And he's dead in the water. He's an incredible defender, and he doesn't have a chance because of these arbitrary rules that, again, are designed for something completely out of his control and we're talking about workarounds that just don't apply to people like Isaac Okoro, man. It's too much. You're thinking too hard. I promise people can do this logic on their own without you invalidating other players' hard work.
I agree. And I think it's extremely they keep moving the goalposts, right? It's a terminology that we continue to say in multiple different aspects of sports. The goalpost continues to be moved when it comes to requirements to not like you talk about the ring conversation, you talk about the champion, what puts you in the upper echelon of a Hall of Famer? What do you have to do to be recognized? Now they're moving the goalposts when it comes to MVP and all these major awards. And sure, Ty Jerome is probably the major one that we're talking about because I keep seeing it on subtext. I keep seeing it on X, formerly Twitter. I keep seeing it on all these different platforms when people are asking continuously why Ty Jerome is not in the most improved category, why Ty Jerome is not on the most improved ballot and all these things. It's because he's not eligible, right? And it's not because of anything that Ty Jerome's doing or not doing. And I feel like we call out a lot of the national reporters. It's not because they're having wrong takes on the situation. They might just be more informed than some of us, right, when it comes to the CBA ruling and all those things. So my take on this would be push Ty Jerome and DeAndre Hunter for sixth man of the year, right? Because in my eyes, if DeAndre Hunter is averaging more points per game off the bench than any other player in the NBA, in less minutes than Peyton Pritchard, in better shooting percentage, I believe, than Peyton Pritchard, don't quote me on that, but I do think that is a testament to what he's doing on that end of the floor, not to mention how much better he is as a defensive player and a defensive deterrer on that end of the floor as well. So for me, my choice of sixth man of the year would be DeAndre Hunter over even Ty Jerome and Peyton Pritchard, just because of his value to not only the Cavs, but also the Atlanta Hawks when he was there, and how important he's been for the Cavs in taking them to the next step. I mean, when he got to Cleveland, I think they went on a 12-game or 16-game winning streak as soon as he got here. So that only illustrates how great they can be with him on the roster and why Kobe Altman, again, should be executive of the year. So, yes, this is a little bit of a preview of what we're going to discuss on a larger, overarching end of season awards conversation when we have Chris Fedor on the podcast. He's traveling today to Indiana and then to New York for the back-to-back. But I do think it is important that we just educate, because I feel like a lot of people on our YouTube are like, I don't learn anything on this podcast. Well, I hope you learned something today.
I'm remembering I wrote about this last year because Donovan last year missed the 65-game requirement for all NBA. And I was asking Kevin Durant and Bradley Beal and Devin Booker about that when the Suns came to town. And we were in a situation now where, again, unintended consequence of this 65-game rule, which is about like 2/3 of the season. I don't know what you at home listener determined as enough games to leave your mark on a season. Sorry, no, that's if I'm doing math. 60 out of 80 would be 75%. We're still talking about 80% of the games. 80% of the games. I don't know what you at home, the listener, determine as enough games played to have left your mark on a season, but I think earlier, my answer is earlier than what the NBA is coming at this from. And the tricky thing is now this stuff is tied to contract incentives. And in certain cases, if we're talking like all NBA third team, some of these fringe candidates, it's not just someone getting left off who might otherwise deserve to be on. It's who gets put on in place of the people who would normally make it. So, for example, this year, Luka Doncic is not going to make All-NBA. Victor Wembanyama is not going to make All-NBA. Someone else is going to get bumped up onto the third team because those two are not going to be on first or second team. And if their contract happens to be coming up at the right time, and they make another All-NBA team, or they end up with Defensive Player of the Year, MVP, all that stuff. Now this team who was thinking one thing about that contract negotiation opens up a whole nother their can of worms. So it's just like, I understand what we're trying to do here. We're trying to incentivize the players to play by holding a carrot in front of them, and this carrot is something that they care a lot about because, as we've established, awards matter in how you're remembered as a player, particularly for the upper echelon guys. I get what we're trying to do there. There's so many unintended consequences that I just feel like a lot of this stuff is unnecessary. If in a normal season, voters are setting their own cutoffs. Before these rules existed, voters were setting their own cutoffs for, if you didn't play this many games, I can't consider you. I'm sorry. I don't care who you are. But in other cases, like, I'm just trying to think, like, what was the year LeBron played like 50-something games, but he was so good? And so maybe I'm going to pull this up. LeBron in 2022-23 was third team All-NBA with 55 games played. Okay? The punishment is built in. LeBron most years is going to be first or second team All-NBA, but he missed some games, so the voters were like, you know what, can't do first or second team this year. Third team, though, LeBron, instead of whoever, middling, maybe all-star guy, definitely deserves it more than that guy. We already had this calculus built in to the point where is it working? Are players resting less? Are players resting less because these rules exist? Maybe. I've not seen the data on that. But here's a question I would ask, and I'm very confident of the answer. What's happening more? Are we disincentivizing players and teams from resting guys? Or are well-meaning, well-deserving players getting left off of award ballots because they had a month-long injury, which happens a lot over the course of 82 games, right? You step on someone's foot the wrong way one time, and you try to be extra cautious about it because you're trying to compete for a championship. Sorry, you don't get to win any awards. That's dumb.
I did not think that's how you were going to end that take, but I think it's fair. I think it's fair to feel that way. I think it's fair as someone who covers the league and gets to watch some of the best players around the world up close on a daily basis. Like, to see them work so hard, and especially, like, say you get injured, like, and you come back even better from that injury. You're not going to get rewarded for the amount of effort that you put in to get back onto the court and all these things. I definitely think that's something to keep an eye on and something that is worth monitoring, because obviously if the CBA can change multiple times throughout the course of our lifetimes, and it already has, but this CBA is valid through 2028. Both sides have the ability to opt out following the 2028-2029 season. So we're kind of stuck in this situation with this CBA. This is the 2024-2025 season. So for the next 4 years at least. I just think it's interesting, right? How this is been set up and how people have thought about it and how the NBA has been trying to put in stuff for more viewership and more getting players to play in more games and all these different things. But going back to what we were saying a little bit earlier about how the bar is getting pushed in different directions when it comes to like what it means to earn these awards, what it means to be a Hall of Famer. If the bar keeps getting further and further, or people feel like they have already clinched they've secured their spot in the Hall of Fame because of a career that happened 10 years ago or over the last 10 years, they really don't care. Yes, I'm looking at you, Kawhi. Yes, I'm looking at you, Joel Embiid. I'm looking at the players who have been told, have argued for, or have thought that they are already on the upper echelon of the NBA, not only for their careers, but in the NBA's history. I mean, we can talk about Joel Embiid complaining for an MVP and Draymond Green kind of doing the same thing for DPOY this year. That's kind of entitlement, and it's a baseline for how these NBA players are thinking and how these NBA players are looking at these awards and how they can, one, either change the trajectory of where they end up in NBA history, or if they care at all, to go after them, like Kawhi Leonard, who is not very much worried about being in these conversations and would rather prioritize his health, make his money, and go on about his life. But Jimmy, speaking of going on about their lives, I wanted to touch on this a little bit because we're talking about the NBA being weird, right? Mike Malone got fired from the Denver Nuggets as the head coach just a few days ago, and there's 3 games left in the NBA season. The Denver Nuggets are fighting for positioning in the Western Conference. That still is like all up in the air when it comes to the 3 through the 8 seed or whatever it is in the Western Conference. I remember an NBA PR posted on X the other day about like how many different variations and options there were for the final games. And I was awestruck in how many different changes there could be just in the last 3 games alone. And yet Mike Malone, who was the 4th longest tenured head coach in the NBA before his firing, was let go. And not only him, but it was also people on his staff and the GM as well. So I definitely think it's an interesting time. And we talked a little bit about this with Kenny Atkinson and the Chicago Bulls head coach about the fragility of the position and the fragility of the NBA as a whole. Jimmy, the NBA is going in the wrong direction, if you were to ask me. Kenny Atkinson said he was not surprised about the firing because nobody feels really safe, right? Maybe Eric Spoelstra, Steve Kerr, Greg Popovich. Those are the 3 other longest tenured coaches in the NBA outside Malone, who was 53 years old. And as I said, the 4th longest tenured coach in the NBA before his firing. What do you think about just the overall shape of the NBA right now and what it means for a coach who had such respect of his players and such a runway for as Malone to be let go at this juncture of the season as well?
So I actually think this is the Mike Malone, Calvin Booth story is another example in many ways of unintended CBA consequences because, deep breath, the Denver Nuggets are quote, they have built their team the quote right way, right? Drafted Jamal Murray, drafted Nikola, drafted the best player in the league in the 2nd round. Yeah, that'll play. That's doing things the right way. These things should be rewarded, right? If you find the idea, the reason that the CBA has changed to such a dramatic degree, we're not talking about awards anymore. We're talking about salary cap. We're talking about the penalties that are placed on teams that are repeatedly expensive, right? You go over the luxury tax. Second apron, I'm not so well rehearsed on the rules anymore. 2 or 3 years in a row, we start punishing you punitively to the point where down the line we make it much harder for you to make trades, aggregate salary and trades. We make it harder. I think they take away your mid-level exception at some point, which when you're over the tax is one of the few legitimate rotation adding pieces that you can use as a team operating over the tax. That's a massive thing for a contender who might want to very with very limited resources reshuffle their bench a little bit, as the Nuggets were trying to do the last couple of years, all the way to the point where if you go over it, I said 3 years in a row or something like that, your first round pick 5 years out automatically gets moved to the end of the first round. Very drastic. All in reaction to what was supposedly this super team era dominated by LeBron and Steph and KD and the Warriors, and honestly in large part to the Steph KD Warriors, which were only allowed to happen because of a one-time fluky cap spike, and it did honestly hurt the league for a little bit that we didn't have a competitive championship situation for a couple of years, but it passed. The league grew, and we moved on. Other teams tried to build their own respective big threes. It hasn't worked to the same degree, right? But now we're in this situation where, as a result of the NBA going, we can't let another super team get built. Some of these teams who are organically, whether you want to call them super teams or not, who are organically drafting really well, developing really well, and trying to retain all their players, are up against it. Case in point, the Denver Nuggets, who won a championship a couple of years ago with Jokic. The core is Jokic, Jamal Murray, Michael Porter Jr., and Aaron Gordon, two key rotation players as well. We're also a part of that. We're Bruce Brown, who then walked for more money, and the Nuggets never really could have paid him what the Pacers offered him because of the kind of contract he was on. I think he might have been a mid-level guy, and there are rules against however many. You can go like 150% or something over a mid-level. I'm really CBA spitballing here, but bear with me. They couldn't pay Bruce Brown. They could have paid KCP, but they balked at the at the offer he got from Orlando, which again, I'm not remember. I think it was 28 years, something like that. And they decided instead, because we have Nikola Jokic, who's going to be a supermax guy, because we have Jamal Murray, who is going to be a very expensive player, over $200 million in his contract. Aaron Gordon, we value a lot. Michael Porter Jr., we value a lot. Michael Porter Jr. is like 150 million total. That's a lot of money for 4 players. So we're going to try to moneyball the rest of our roster. Calvin Booth, who took over for Tim Connolly, that's important. Tim Connolly is the guy who built this team. Tim Connolly went to Minnesota. Calvin Booth took it over. Him and Michael Malone didn't get along. That's another big part of this. But part of the reason, the major reason they didn't get along is because Calvin Booth was trying to moneyball the roster by moving future picks for current picks because he liked certain guys at the end of the first round, like your Peyton Watsons or your Christian Browns. Christian Brown's actually been a hit. Or in the second round, guys like Julian Strother, Jalen Pickett, these kind of guys. He was thinking these guys are our future Bruce Browns or Contavious Caldwell Popes, what have you. And for those young players to develop, they need to play. But for Michael Malone to want to play them, they need to be playable. And herein lies the rub. Coach doesn't want to play your Moneyball players, but your Moneyball players need to be played if this roster is going to be what you want it to be. So I say all that to say, the Nuggets are not in a good place right now. They haven't been playing well. Michael Malone, in one of his last press conferences, said that they weren't watching film. And maybe we talked about this in the media room last night. Michael Malone, pretty old school coach, pretty prickly personality at sometimes. Maybe some of the Denver Nuggets are just tired of being screamed at by this guy. That's entirely possible. But I do wonder if we get here, if the Nuggets keep KCP, like if they have that 3-and-D guy that they're so, like Christian Brown has been pretty good. You could argue he's been better than KCP this year, who's having a really bad year in Orlando. But he's not what KCP was. He doesn't shoot threes at the same clip. Doesn't put the same scare into defenses. It's easier for teams to shrink the floor against Nikola Jokic and KCP as a perimeter defender against smaller guys. Christian Brown's pretty good. I don't know that he's quite what KCP was. This is all a downstream effect of, again, a well-intentioned big picture idea from the NBA that is now having cataclysmic effects in some instances with the Nuggets and all these. You see all these championship winning teams that are firing coaches. I mean, there's a lot of factors that go into each one of those, but here's a quick if then for you. If you make it hard to sustain a really expensive, talented roster, then it might be harder for the people who organize those rosters to sustain success, and that might mean that impatient owners might get tired of them. That's the long and short of it.
It's also important to acknowledge that this isn't the first Western Conference team to make a significant move ahead of the playoffs. The Memphis Grizzlies, in the same battle for playoff positioning, fired Taylor Jenkins on March 28th with 9 games remaining, right? And we talk a little bit about how the roster construction and how the roster contracts and things of that nature were affecting this. And Jimmy, I think you make a great point in saying that. A couple of those that I wanted to touch on were Zeke, who got a hefty 4-year deal, and Malone with the Denver Nuggets barely used him. Then you got Dario, who was picked up in free agency.
Right.
And
this is Zeke Naji and Dario Saric, by the way.
Yeah. And he fell out of favor with Malone. And then Booth went and got Russell Westbrook. And Russell has basically been a large part in some of the biggest losses down the stretch for the Nuggets. And it was kind of internally trying to figure out why Malone was playing Russell instead of other guys in those situations, right? And obviously Jenkins was kind of in a similar situation, but still different when at the beginning of last year or beginning of this year, he was told that he had to get rid of a majority of his staff that he had brought on with him. It was mainly because the Grizzlies had lost so many games, right, last year, but it was also in part because, if I'm not mistaken, Desmond Bane and Ja Morant combined to miss 113 games last year. So that's why they went 27-55. And then this year, it was like, okay, we'll see what happens because we don't know what Ja's going to be like when he gets back. We don't know how Desmond Bane's going to recover from his injuries. And surprisingly, they're in contention for a top seed in the playoffs, right? Not in the top 2, but when I'm literally looking at what the NBA PR put out today for the Western Conference, it's number 1, OKC, number 2, Houston Rockets, and then the options for 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8 seed, Lakers, Clippers, Nuggets, Warriors, Grizzlies, Timberwolves. They all can either be in the 3rd seed or the 8th seed with 3 games remaining in the NBA regular season. And Jimmy, I think that's insane because we talked about how competitive the Western Conference is, but for them to have that level of potential change, and yet there's teams like Memphis, there's teams like Denver. It's crazy to think that teams would, at this point of the season, go away from guys that have either gotten them to the Western Conference semifinals, the Western Conference finals, the NBA finals, and just go away from them. But Jimmy, I want to turn this around to the Cavs real quick to end today's podcast. I mean, Kenny Atkinson, again, like I said earlier, was not fazed by this because he knows the fragility of the NBA coaching world. But I mean, we look back to just the end of last year where Jamie Bickerstaff, after leading the team to 99 wins over the last 2 seasons, was let go. That's where we're at in the NBA now, Jimmy. If you're not bringing rings, kind of the same thing as the conversation I had earlier about how that can determine where people and players are in the upper echelons of NBA history and their NBA careers, it's based on championships. Nobody cares about the regular season anymore, Jimmy. So that's what we're talking about. The CBA, 65 games, nobody cares. Everybody cares about where you are in the playoffs. And obviously, as I mentioned, the Western Conference has a lot of different changes that can be made. But I bet you all of these teams are happy to simply be in the playoffs. Obviously, they don't want to be in the play-in tournament. They don't want to be in the quote-unquote postseason. They want to get to the playoffs because they feel like once they get there, they have the same level of competitive level with a lot of these different teams. Obviously, the Cavs are the number 1 seed in the Eastern Conference after beating the Bulls last night. But what do you think this means just for the coaches when it comes to the regular season, how they're trying to balance 65-game season, the CBA, salary caps, and also keeping their players healthy going into the playoffs, because that is the most important thing above all else, not only for getting to a championship, but also for their coaching stability as well.
That's why you get paid the big bucks. Steve Kerr made this point yesterday. He was asked about the Michael Malone decision, and he was saying there's just more money in the league now. Coaching salaries are much higher than they used to be, which must be nice. But it also comes with big billionaire owners, deep pockets that don't care about your buyout. So if they're not happy, billionaires didn't become billionaires by being patient necessarily, or or by tolerating disappointment, by tolerating poor employees under them, right? What they perceive to be poor employees under them. So when you have unlimited bankroll and you don't like the way something is happening in your company and you're in the franchise that you're controlling, see you later. Not a big deal. That's part of it. And it's so funny that it's Michael Malone that we're having this conversation about, because as it pertains to the Cavs, when Kobe, this was the I have fired JB Bickerstaff press conference last year. I can't remember, it might have been me who asked it. This has been a long, long season. But somebody asked Kobe about the concept of patience and as it pertains to keeping the core 4 together. And Kobe cited the Denver Nuggets as a model for patience. Look at the rope they gave Michael Malone and Nikola Jokic and Jamal Murray. They didn't figure it out right away. And then they didn't, when Jamal Murray got hurt, that was a big setback for them. But ownership was, and the front office, then I think when they won the title, it was still Tim Connolly, was patient enough to let the 2-man game between Nikola and Jamal simmer, to let Tim Connolly make other additions like your Aaron Gordon trade, to let Michael Malone keep working with that group and develop it. And look what happened. They won a championship. 1 year later, everyone's fired. This is where we're at now. I'm thinking of this I don't want to put bad juju in the air, but if the Cavs, what I'm thinking here, the concept in my head is you're never more than a disappointing playoff exit away from getting your snow globe shaken, right? So right now, as we sit here, April 9th, the Cavs just clinched the number 1 seed in the Eastern Conference. I literally wrote this morning, that's the first step toward beating Boston and making the finals. It is. But if the Cavs lose in the second round, or the Cavs get, it's an ugly 5-gamer against Boston, I don't think either of those things are going to happen. I think this is real, and I think they're going to give Boston a good run for it. But if this goes sideways, we're not right back where we started, but we're taking big picture looks at the roster again. Kenny has earned a lot of rope here, so we're not talking about him, but next year there's going to be a lot of pressure on him going into the playoffs, no doubt. It's the playoffs are everything. Maybe that's not fair, but that's the reality. So this is why Donovan keeps slamming the table saying we haven't done ish yet, because they know how this stuff works. This is, you write your legacy between now and June. That's just how it goes.
I had a subtexter hit me up talking about the coaching has been bad since March, since All-Star break technically, and all these things. And obviously there's been people on X and formerly Twitter that have been saying the same thing. But this particular subtexter was like, if they don't get out of the first round or the second round or whatever, Kenny Atkinson needs to be fired. And I was like, it's year one. 2, they're 63-16, excuse me. And I was like, hold on, let's rewind. to when we were talking about this team as the best team in the NBA, not just the best team in the Eastern Conference, just a few months ago, right? And obviously, once they got that big of a lead on Boston, they understood that they could play around a little bit, and it was not necessarily them playing and being like, oh, this is a scheduled loss. No, it was an experimentation period for the Cavs to see what they have. And to be very fair, I think if they do not get out of a certain playoff series, especially if they don't get past the Eastern Conference semifinals, because I believe that to be their first goal of this playoffs year, I think they've had tryouts basically for guys that they feel are not necessarily bringing enough to get them to where they want to go. They've seen who is a liability on both ends of the floor. They've seen what these players can contribute throughout different lineups, throughout different games, throughout different series. And again, that'll come to fruition a little bit more in the playoffs as we look to see how these different players are used and how the rotations shrink and all those things. But I don't, as Jimmy mentioned, I think Kenny Atkinson has gained a lot of leeway for being in his first season and being able to bring the Cavs to what they've been able to accomplish already in his first year as the Cavs head coach. And I think there's a little bit of statistical history that goes along with that, right? When we talk about Kenny Atkinson and being in his first season, with the win against the Chicago Bulls, Kenny Atkinson became the 5th head coach in NBA history to win at least 63 games in the first season with a new team, right? So not only is he helping the Cavs break franchise history, separate themselves from the LeBron James era, bringing them into a new level of empowerment and all these different things, but he's just starting to get the flow of getting to know these guys. He still doesn't feel like he knows DeAndre Hunter to the best level, and he's continuously trying to get there. So how do you think that's going to change in year 2? That's only going to get better. You get a summer with these guys. Reminder, Kenny Atkinson was in France for a majority of last summer trying to help the French national team win a gold medal, right? And yet he still made time to go see Darius Garland in Nashville, Donovan Mitchell in Connecticut and in LA, Evan Mobley in LA as well. So I definitely think it's a testament to what Kenny Atkinson has been able to build in the relationships as a former player development coach, the relationships that he's built and how that's helped the Cavs get to where they are. So again, in the era of coaches having short leases, in the era of coaches being on the chopping block as probably some of the first things to go in an unsuccessful season, I think Kenny Atkinson has earned at least a second go at it. So, and I think that's bare minimum. But with all that being said, that'll wrap up today's episode of the Wine and Gold Talk podcast. But remember to become a Cavs insider and interact with Chris, me, and Jimmy by subscribing to Subtext. This is where you can send in your questions for the next Hey Chris episode, which will come at the end of this week. Or if you want to talk to us about the CBA, if you want to pick our brains and see if we have better knowledge with the information in front of us rather than readily talking about it on the podcast, let's have some conversations about what you think is important about the regular season, how the 65-game rule is being used, and also contracts, the first apron, second apron, and all of these things. But you can only do that if you sign up for a 14-day free trial or visit cleveland.com/Cavs and click on the blue bar at the top of the page. If you don't like it, that's fine. All you have to do is text the word STOP. It's easy, but we can tell you that the people who sign up stick around because this is the best way to get insider coverage on the Cavs from me, Chris, and Jimmy. This isn't just our podcast, it's your podcast. And the only way to have your voice heard is through Subtext. Y'all be safe. We out.